You're the, what do we call it, the head of the Zombie Research Society?
That's correct.
So tell me a bit about yourself and about the society.
So Zombie Research Society essentially is a collection of academics and enthusiasts who are, I guess our stated goal is to advance zombie knowledge and respect in the arts and sciences. So on the science side, we don't make anything up. We don't say, there was a zombie outbreak last week, somewhere, because we all know that didn't happen. But we kind of ask the question, if a zombie were to actually show up at your front door, what would it really look like? How would it actually hunt you? Like if we were actually in a situation of a zombie outbreak, what would that really be like? And then we try to extrapolate survival strategies. On the art side, we just try to encourage better examples of zombies in art, everything from traditional painting to TV and movies and all that sort of stuff, because we're obviously big zombie fans. We also think that zombies are the most relevant and compelling and arguably popular monster of the past 50 years, So we kind of try to, celebrate that. And for me personally, I've just sort of been obsessed with zombies forever. So,
So what is a zombie?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, if you look in, I mean, that's almost one of the problems, is that if you look in Oxford's English Dictionary, which is widely regarded as the most comprehensive dictionary of the English language, the only definition they have is for the Haitian voodoo zombie, that is a soulless slave that's brought back to life by a sorcerer to do menial labor in the fields and is not dangerous and not infectious and doesn't want to eat you. And that's nothing like the zombie that we sort of think of in zombie movies and The Walking Dead and zombie walks all over the place. So the definition, so technically speaking, the zombie that we all love and that make all this money in movies like Zombieland and TV shows and video games doesn't technically exist according to the dictionary. But the definition that I like to use is that a zombie, strictly speaking, is a relentlessly aggressive, reanimated human corpse driven by a biological infection. So what that means is that you can break it down into three parts. One is it's relentlessly aggressive, right? So you don't negotiate with a zombie, right? You don't say to a zombie, "Hey, eat my friend instead of me," or go eat that family down the street, and they're going to taste better than I am, or I'll give you $20 if you don't eat me. Zombie doesn't care about anything, and it will eat you and your friend and the family down the street, and so there's nothing you can do to stop a zombie from wanting to do what it wants to do, which is essentially attack and kill and eat you. So that's the relentless aggressive, and then the reanimated human corpse is self-explanatory. And then the biological infection, the reason that I like that and use that is that unlike most other popular monsters, zombies are biologically based. And what I mean by that is they don't have superhuman strength, they don't crawl on ceilings, they don't have superpowers, they can't read your mind, and they don't fly. And they're also not based on some ancient superstition or myth. So if you look at, vampires are just the opposite, right? You don't try to scientifically explain how a vampire can turn into a bat or how it goes to your high school and steals your girlfriend, right? So with a zombie, it's very much kind of flesh and blood and limited in its ability. It's a rotting corpse. And also it's infectious. So if you get toxic blood or bitten, or you get some sort of zombie fluid inside your system, you are then doomed to become a zombie. So it's kind of like an infectious disease in that way. So that's that kind of the definition that I like.
Well, how did you get involved with all of this? I mean, this is a heck of a devotion that you have.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I've always been obsessed with zombies. I mean, it's been a long time, and I actually, through that sort of natural interest, I come to it from the film side, and I actually ended up getting my master's degree from New York University Film School, and somehow convinced them to let me do my master's thesis on zombies. So I really ended up, studying zombie movies a lot, and then through a series of circumstances, I ended up working several years later at a disease research facility that focused on serious infectious diseases like HIV and hepatitis and things like that. And so from there, I just started asking those questions that I kind of mentioned. I was like, okay, well, I'm kind of really afraid of zombies. I've always been obsessed with zombie movies, and let me start really trying to do some serious scientific research about this, what I call an unrealized threat, a theoretical threat. We don't have a zombie that we can sit and lie on a table and dissect and figure out how it's going to work. So it's all theory. But I think it's a lot of fun to be like, okay, well, what are they really all about, and what's, what diseases out there are mutating in strange ways that could create zombies. So that's how this all started for me.
So what's the scientific side of it? Have you researched that? The actuality of this happening? The likelihood?
Yeah, well, our board on Zombie Research Society, our advisory board is made up of leading scholars in a variety of different fields, and many of them are science-based. So, for instance, we've got several leading neuroscientists from across North America and that have developed a 3D model of the zombie brain. We've got an epidemiologist who's a professor at University of Iowa, and she is an expert in studying new and undiscovered infectious diseases. So she's her job is to figure out, where the next great deadly pandemic is going to come from, and what animals are going to create it, and et cetera, et cetera. So, in terms of the scientific basis,
these people get paid to research a zombie apocalypse.
Well, no. I mean, they get, the neuroscientists. They're all professors at different universities, so they actually get paid to do their research in whatever their specialty is, right? And then for fun, kind of on their own time, they are volunteer. We're kind of all volunteer members of Zombie Research Society, so it's essentially an all volunteer organization. So, for fun, they sort of do zombie research on the side because it's fun. And they kind of apply.
And that was my next question. Is this a paying gig?
Not a paying gig. No, it's not. It's not a paying gig for anybody. I mean, it's essentially it's a hobby or a sort of a volunteer thing. But yeah, it's definitely a ton of fun. In addition to that, I should say for me, I am a full-time zombie expert, so I'm a little different than the other members of the board. But that's because I give college lectures across the U.S. and Canada, and I've got a couple books out and things like that. So I make my living talking about and writing about zombies, but it's not. And it uses a lot of the research that we do in Zombie Research Society, but it's not technically directly related to Zombie Research Society, if that makes any sense. You know what I mean?
Are there any diseases that scientists look at that have any kind of potential for creating a zombie apocalypse?
Yeah, the short answer would be yes, and I'll go into a couple of them. But that's the thing about this stuff is I really got into researching this stuff because I'm freaked out by zombies, and the theory is, oh, face your fears, right? Oh, face your fears and you'll overcome them. And the problem is when you really start looking into this stuff and talking to real experts, it seems a lot more realistic than I ever thought. So I'm actually more afraid of zombies now than I ever was. So it's kind of a bummer for me. But if we think about zombies, to go back to that definition for a minute, if we think about zombies a little more broadly, so there's a new wave of zombies in movies, particularly that I like to call the living zombie. And so if you think about 28 Days Later, which is a movie from 2002 where they're kind of rage infected and they never die and come back to life, but they're relentlessly aggressive and they're trying to attack you and turn you into them. Another example is Zombieland, which a lot of people don't realize, but the movie Zombieland, even though it's called Zombieland and they're called zombies throughout it, they never die and come back to life. They're actually still alive. They're living people that are just infected with, this sickness that causes them to look horrible and want to attack and eat the living. So, like I said, I call that the living zombie. But if we look at the definition of the living zombie,
or like quarantine,
exactly.
Yeah.
Quarantine, same thing, right? Exactly. And the Spanish movie that was a remake of, which is called REC, REC. But yeah, so if you think about that, well, then the definition of the living zombie would be a relentlessly aggressive human driven by a biological infection, right? So the only difference between that and the traditional, what I call modern zombie, is that it's not technically undead, right? So in some ways, actually, from a survival point of view, it's better for us because a living zombie needs to drink water, it can die of dehydration, it needs to sleep. It needs to do a lot of the things that humans need to do to live. So, and it's also easier to kill, right? Because if you shoot a living zombie in the heart, it dies. It doesn't come back as an undead zombie. It's like, that's it. So it's essentially just a rage infected person. But what I would say is that if there's some sort of infected maniac who's trying to claw down my door to get at me, to eat me and turn me into what of it, I'm not really interested in having an academic debate about whether or not that's really a zombie. You know, well, that doesn't really count. That's not really a zombie. It's like, well, wait a minute. I mean, you might be right, but in the end, I'm the one still getting my leg chewed off. You know what I mean? Like, it's the end result is exactly the same. I get bitten, I turn into one of it, and then I go eat my whole family. So for me, the distinction is not, you know, as big as some purists would argue it is. But so going back to your question, it's much easier to find diseases out there that are mutating if we look at this living version of zombie. And so one example is the protein that causes mad cow disease in people. And, you know, mad cow has been in the news recently because of the recent outbreak in the United States, in California, just last week. So mad cow is caused by a protein. It's actually a prion. It's a mutated protein. And in humans, it's called CJD is the short for it. So it's not called mad cow in humans. It's called CJD. So this protein has been around since the beginning of time. So there's nothing new about it. But when I was growing up, we didn't hear a lot about mad cow. You know, mad cow's really only been in the news for the last 10 years or so. So this protein's been around forever. But traditionally, the only way that you could catch CJD, only way you could catch this mad cow in humans from another person was to actually eat their brains after they died. So, like, if you had CJD and you died, and then I ate your brains, then I would get it, right? So who eats, you know, nobody eats human brains. So you would only see these little outbreaks in pockets of cannibalistic, you know, tribal villages in Africa and South America. Very rarely would you ever see this outbreak. But what's happening is over the past 10 years, the symptoms of the CJD have been changing, and the way that it's transmitted has been changing also. So now there's new evidence that it can actually be transmitted from blood to blood. So no longer do I have to eat your brains if you die. All I have to do is get any of your infected blood inside of me, and then I'll get it. Secondly, the symptoms are now changing so that it causes you, in its late stages, it causes you to go insane, and often violently insane. So much so that an expert at the Mad Cow Institute in England has suggested if someone starts showing late stages of CJD, you should lock them in a room and let them go violently insane until they die. Because if they attack you and bite you, you will then also get CJD, and you will for sure go crazy and for sure die. And that's essentially the premise of Zombieland. In the beginning of Zombieland, they say mad cow disease turned to mad human disease turned to mad zombie disease. So we've already got mad cow disease, we've already got mad human disease, and these new symptoms of the mad human disease are causing people to go violently insane and attack each other, and spread this through bite or blood. That sounds like mad zombie disease to me. So I'll tell you one more thing about this. An expert that I was actually talking to at the end of last year about this movie Contagion, which is obviously not a zombie movie, but, you know, a movie about a sort of new virus spreading around. I called him up, and he's the head of a leading think tank that studies new infectious diseases. And I've known him for many years and talked to him about different research that's coming down the pike. And so I called him up and I was talking to him about that movie to see how realistic it was. And I said, hey, you know, I don't know if you heard about this new study that came out of Sweden where they have actually created a prion disease of this mutated protein that actually can transmit through the aerosol route. It can be airborne. So what they got was they actually infected a mouse, and they got it so that all the mouse had to do is breathe in the general direction of another mouse, and the other mouse would then contract this horrible disease, right? So he says to me, and think about it, that's a long way from having to eat someone's brain, to just breathe in their general direction, right? So he says to me, oh God, don't say that. So I say back to him, oh God, don't say that, because you're supposed to be in charge of worrying about, you know, protecting North America from the next great pandemic, and you know, it's your job to protect us, and you know, that freaks me out when you say, oh God, don't say that. So he says, I don't even want to know about it. Yeah, that's right. He says, I don't even want to know about it. I don't even want to know about it, because the problem is experts do not know a lot about why these prion diseases, these mutated proteins, are changing and evolving, and they don't know, you know, why they infect us and how they infect us and how they're mutating. So all this stuff is great mystery, and the problem is it's all, in my opinion, it's all like moving in the bad direction.
Well, you're freaking me out, man.
Yeah, I'm telling you. I'll tell you one more. more. So when I was researching my last book, I talked to a virologist at the University of Miami, an expert on different viruses. And I said to her, and she doesn't know anything about zombies. She's not interested in zombies at all. She actually didn't even really know what zombies were. So I had to describe to her what the actual sickness was like. And she said to me, just very matter-of-factly, she said, "Oh, well, we could create a sickness like that in the lab today, no problem." And I said, "What?" She's like, "Well, yeah, I mean, we can clone people and we can clone sheep, and that's a lot more complex than combining, a highly deadly strain of rabies with a highly deadly strain of the flu, and you mix in a few other viruses to make it faster acting and stronger, and all of a sudden you have this airborne super rabies that causes everyone to go violently insane and attack and kill each other." And I was like, "Oh, well, thanks for the information." That was a depressing phone call. She obviously said it's a lot of, it's not like just mixing two little vials of whatever, right? I mean, a massive amount of research and dollars would have to go into it. But she was like, "Look, if you had scientists that had the know-how and they had the right lab and they had enough funding that they could actually, really do this, it's a lot easier to do that than it is to clone people, and we're doing that."
Yeah, but they can't reanimate the dead, though. We're talking about the living rabies.
Exactly. Right.
Type zombie. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, well, let's take a break, Matt, and let's get into the origin of the zombie and where the heck they came from.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll take a break, and we'll be back with Matt Mogk in 2 minutes. Okay, Matt. So what is the origin of the zombie?
Yeah, well, the modern zombie as we know it today, right? That really, really started.
Well, all zombies are modern, you're saying.
Yeah, well, no, actually, there's the voodoo zombie, right? So the zombie that exists in the dictionary, in the dictionary definition, and actually there are zombies in Haiti today. So I guess I should explain that. But voodoo zombies are it's essentially a religious ceremony. So what happens is if you are of the voodoo belief, you go through this ceremony and you're drugged. Basically, you're given drugs and you go through this religious ceremony and you're put in a coffin, and then you pass out, and several hours or days later the coffin is opened up and you're told that you died and you have now been brought back to life by the sorcerer who owns your soul, right? So you're brought back to life, but you believe you no longer have a soul, because the sorcerer owns your soul because they magically brought you back to life. But the key difference between that and the zombie that we understand is that you're actually alive. You're not undead, meaning you have a beating heart. You need to eat food. Secondly, you're not aggressive at all. You're just you. You're a living person that is just like you were before. It's just that you happen to believe that your soul is owned by someone else. So you have to be their slave and do whatever they say. So, if you think about that in terms of the zombie that we know from movies and video games, it really has nothing. It's nothing like it. But that is another type of zombie. So that's the voodoo zombie. And that's why, I like to use the term modern zombie for the zombie that we all know, because it's sort of fundamentally different than that. But, interestingly enough, to me, is that the zombie that we all know and love actually has nothing to do with the voodoo zombie, other than the fact that they share the same name. So, and the reason for that is that George Romero, who created the zombie, modern zombie, in 1968's Night of the Living Dead, it was really the first movie that had this creature that, no one had ever heard of a creature before that, would come back from the dead and eat the living and be relentlessly aggressive and just, do and not be afraid to get injured and just sort of do anything it could to eat every last living person. That was a completely new concept. And so, Romero basically created this monster. He actually called them flesh eaters at the time. He didn't call them zombies because, again, zombies were the voodoo zombies. So in his mind, they were this new creature called flesh eaters. And the great thing about it is that actually the modern zombie evolved from vampires. So it didn't even evolve from the concept of the voodoo zombie. There was a vampire novel from the 1950s called I Am Legend, which I'm sure many people have heard of the movie that came out with Will Smith, I Am Legend. So essentially, in I Am Legend, the writer Richard Matheson, he wanted to take the vampire out of sort of the superstitious world of, mysticism and supernatural. And he wanted to create a biological explanation for vampires. So what he did is he literally, in his book, he took out all the superpowers of vampires. So vampires no longer had superhuman strength. They couldn't fly. They couldn't do anything that a normal human couldn't do, right? On top of that, he created a bacterial explanation. So actually, vampirism was a bacterial infection that you got inside of you that caused you to become a vampire, right? He still kept it that they died and came back to life. So that was still there, but he tried to make it as biological as possible, and he held on to a few other things to make sure people knew that they were vampires. So, for instance, they couldn't go out during the day, and they didn't like garlic, and they didn't like crosses and things like that, right? So he kept some of that stuff so you could definitely recognize them as vampires. But the key difference that he made is, rather than having the vampires just sort of live on the edge of town and suck the blood of some virgin every other week or so and try to stay, below the radar, he made it so that the vampires wanted to suck the blood and turn every last living person on the planet into a vampire, right? So there were giant hordes of vampires roaming the streets at night trying to find every last living person to turn them into vampires. They didn't want any people left on the planet. Sounds a lot like what we think of as zombies, right? So when Romero wanted to make his first movie ever, never make it a feature film, he was just some young kid in Pittsburgh, struggling to get by, and he's like, I want to make a movie. So he decided, all right, I'm going to make a horror movie. And what he wanted to do is he wanted to make I Am Legend. He was so inspired, and he said this in interviews repeatedly. He was so inspired by I Am Legend that he was like, look, I essentially want to make that movie, but he didn't want to get sued because he didn't have enough money to buy the rights, and the movie was already owned by the book was already owned by the movie studios. So there's no way he could make I Am Legend. So he said, all right, this is what I'm going to do. I want to make a movie as close to I Am Legend as I can, but I don't want to get sued. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take every last vestige of the vampire out of my monster. So forget about the crosses and the garlic. None of that stuff matters. And rather than having them only come out at night, I'll have them come out all the time. So I'll set my movie in the day, start in the day, and have them, they can attack people at day and at night. And lastly, he said, okay, look. On top of that, rather than sucking their blood, I'm going to have my monster eat the entire person. So it's not just a matter of sucking the blood out of them. It's like they want to eat everything. They want to eat their feet. They want to eat their, hair, whatever. And he's like, that way no one could possibly sue me because it's not vampires. So he thought he was creating this completely new creature called a flesh eater. But the funny thing about it is that many experts argue that Night of the Living Dead is still a more true adaptation of I Am Legend than any of the adaptations that have been made of that book. And there have been 3. So it's sort of like it stays closer to, even though they're not vampires, it stays sort of closer to the heart of what I Am Legend is really all about. And Richard Matheson, the first time he saw Night of the Living Dead on TV, thought, there's this great quote of him saying that he thought that the studio had remade his movie without telling him, had adapted his movie. So he's like, yeah, I caught Night of the Living Dead on TV, and I thought, oh my gosh, the studio, adapted my book again and didn't pay me, So that's how much he thought it was his movie. So yeah, I mean, the crazy thing is nobody even called them zombies at the time. When Night of the Living Dead came out, they weren't known as zombies. They were called ghouls or flesh eaters or, monsters.
Right, so none of the promotional materials or anywhere in the movie is the word zombie used.
No, and none of the cast. I mean, no one thought of them as zombies. Romero didn't think of them as zombies. None of the reviews written about by different, the press out there.
Had the band, the Zombies, started at that point?
Yeah, they were the band, the Zombies, was already around.
They were the Zombies, but they were talking about the voodoo zombies.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it was essentially sort of a slow process where the term zombie actually got applied to these creatures.
Romero takes it up a notch
with
Day of the Dead. I think that's the next one, is it not?
Well, Dawn of the Dead is the next one,
Dawn of the Dead.
1978. Yep. The interesting thing about that is by the time Dawn of the Dead comes along in 1978. People had started calling this undead creature that he created zombies. And part of the reason they did is because there wasn't really a name for them. In the movie, they don't really call them anything, so they kind of needed a name. And Romero originally wanted Night of the Living Dead to be called Night of the Flesh Eaters, and because he was like, I'm creating this new creature called a flesh eater. But the distribution company actually changed the name to Night of the Living Dead at the last minute, so that term flesh eaters kind of got lost. So by the time Dawn of the Dead comes along, people are sort of calling them zombies because there weren't really any popular zombie movies out, and so it was sort of an available term. Well, these things are undead, they come back to life, they're not vampires. What are they? Well, I guess we'll call them zombies. And then what's his name? I'm forgetting his name, but a prominent Italian filmmaker gave Romero $750,000 to make Dawn of the Dead, and he said, "Look, I just want to have the European rights to your movie, so you can make whatever movie you want in the United States, and then once it's done, I want to re-edit it and I'm going to release it in Europe." And so he did that with Dawn of the Dead, and he changed the name of Dawn of the Dead in Europe to Zombie. So the name of Dawn of the Dead, when it's released in Europe, is Zombie, and it was a massive hit in Europe. Just made a ton of money, and it was called Zombie. So essentially,
there's another movie out there called Zombie too, though, isn't there?
Exactly. Yeah. Now Zombie was released in 1978, or Dawn of the Dead, and it's actually called Zombie, Zombi, which would be the Italian spelling, right? So Romero's movie is called Zombie, Zombi, and then there was another movie that came out in Italy at the same time called Zombie, Zombie. But its secondary title is also Zombie 2, which is Zombi 2, because they sort of treated it as a sequel to Dawn of the Dead, even though it's not.
Right. Okay.
That makes any sense. But that's a really good movie, that Zombie 2.
I've heard it's good. That's right, and that's why I asked, because I haven't seen it.
It's a really good movie, and it's got the famous scene in it of a shark fighting a zombie under the ocean, and it's a real guy dressed up like a zombie and a real shark, and they fight each other. I mean, it's in the ocean. It's no joke. It's a real scene.
That's worth the price of admission right there.
It really is. It really is. Yeah. So then that was Dawn of the Dead, which Dawn of the Dead made something 50+ million, 55 million worldwide in its release, which was a big success. Actually, though, if you adjust for inflation, Night of the Living Dead at the time it made 42 million, which still remains the highest grossing zombie movie of all time. Because if you adjust for inflation, as of 2009, when Zombieland came out, Zombieland made $100 million, but Night of the Living Dead actually, adjusted for inflation, made $164 million. So, blew it out of the water. But yeah, so then Day of the Dead comes along, which is kind of the third of his trilogy. That's a really good movie too.
Yeah, I like it a lot. I actually kind of, in some ways, like it more than Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah, it's fun. Well, Day of the Dead's got Bub, Bub is a very famous zombie, and there are several, there may be a dozen or so really famous zombies throughout zombie movie history, and Bub is definitely one of them. Bub is a zombie from Day of the Dead, for those of you that haven't seen it, that is sort of a gentle zombie. I mean, he still wants to eat people, and he's chained up, but there's a scientist who's trying to train him to eat something other than living people, so he's sort of feeding him the flesh of recently dead, and he's teaching him to enjoy music and use a telephone and use weapons and things like that. So
there's something very psychological about the fact that they're in this facility and being run by the military and having the zombie presence outside.
Yep.
So it's more claustrophobic, I find, than the first one.
Yeah, more depressing, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah, that's right. But then it gets kind of entertaining, and this is where the Russo element to the Romero story takes place.
Yeah, exactly. That you're talking about Return of the Living Dead, right?
Right, which is I find to be the more entertaining of the films.
Yeah, well, and Return of the Living Dead came out the same year as Day of the Dead. And so there was a little bit of hullabaloo because Romero didn't like at the time. He didn't like Return of the Living Dead because a lot of people were getting it confused for his movie. Like a lot of people thought that he made Return of the Living Dead and we're getting Day of the Dead and Return of the Living Dead confused. But the great thing about Return of the Living Dead, and I agree with you, it's such a fun movie, is it really introduced the zombie romp. Like sort of this tradition that has now come up of just a lot of fun, like turn it up to 11 and let's just have a good time with this zombie movie. You know what I mean? And so that's really what it was. It didn't really.
And they even featured the all 80s rock soundtrack.
Totally, and it's a bunch of punk rock kids. And the great thing about it is that if you ask 10 people, and I do this, when I give these lectures around, I always ask people, and I do it on the street too, ask people how much they know about zombies. And some people will say, you ask 10 different people, you get 10 different answers, right? Some people will say, I don't know anything about zombies. And some people will be like, oh, I love zombies and I play all the games and I've seen all the movies. And then you ask those same 10 people what zombies eat, and every single one of them will say brains. Everybody. You ask anybody what zombies eat and they'll say brains. And the funny thing about that is that it's only from the Return of the Living Dead film series. So no other zombie movies, almost no other zombie movies, do zombies eat brains. In no Romero movies do zombies eat brains. Zombies didn't eat brains in Zombieland. Zombies don't eat brains in 28 Days Later or Shaun of the Dead or you name any zombie movie. Zombies do not eat brains, but they eat brains in Return of the Living Dead. And so that's one of the reasons why that movie is so iconic, is that Tarman, who's another very famous zombie, is the first, and he's sort of this, he is what he sounds like. He's this almost skeleton covered in this nasty ooze of tar that's been stuck in this military drum, this biohazard drum for who knows how long. And he gets out of the drum and, the first thing he says is brains. And he eats, he's the first guy ever on screen to eat brains, the first zombie. So somehow, that caught on. So at this point, what do we have? We have zombies that eat brains, which again never really caught on in movies, but it definitely caught on in popular culture. So
and there's one other major difference too, Matt.
Well, I mean that they can't be killed by destroying the brain.
That's right. You can't kill these zombies.
You can't kill these zombies in any way, and they can talk, and they can calculate, and they can scheme and plot, and they can do all sorts of stuff. So, and also if you set them on fire, their ashes can rain down on the earth and actually create more zombies, which is how the original sickness was spread. None of that stuff caught on in popular culture except that they eat brains. So that's kind of funny, but that was definitely an important contribution.
Oh, so the canonical zombie lore, shooting them in the head is the way to go.
Oh, absolutely. And the funny thing about that is that it inherently doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, so for instance, if we go back to our example of asking 10 people questions about zombies,
yeah.
If I ask those 10 people what do zombies eat, they all say brains. And then I ask those 10 people, how do you kill a zombie? And they'll all say, you destroy its brain. But here's the problem with that. If zombies eat brains, and the only way to kill a zombie is by destroying the brain, the zombies are actually destroying their own reinforcements before they've even created a zombie, right? So if I'm a zombie and I eat your brains and you have no brains left, then you can never become a zombie. So inherently it's paradoxical. It doesn't really make any sense, but somehow it caught on in pop culture.
Do zombies have needs?
Well, generally the notion is that they have this overwhelming drive to do a singular thing, which is, hunt and seek out and attack the living. So some examples, they attack the living and eat them, like they'll eat the whole person. In other ones, they sort of just bite you or, bite and chew or just want to scrape at you or, sort of turn you into one of them. But pretty much all examples, for the most part, at least, the popular culture understanding is that they just have this singular drive to hunt. They're sort of this like a virus with legs and teeth,
But they'll never, they won't die if they don't eat you.
Well, they don't. Yeah, right. They won't starve to death in any sort of traditional sense, but they don't live forever, right? Because again, they're biologically based, so they are a rotting corpse. I mean, that's why they look gross, right? So eventually, they're going to rot back into the earth and not be able to do anything anymore. I mean, they're just going to be a pile of ooze sitting on the pavement, So they are rotting and they are affected by the elements and potentially bacteria and things like that. So they don't live forever.
from the Return of the Living Dead series, which is sort of tongue-in-cheek, they get back to being serious again.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing about it is that the zombie, with the developments of Return of the Living Dead and the things that we've already talked about that it brought to the table, and the only thing to stick in it really was that it ate brains. So aside from the eating brains, the zombie that we know from George Romero's original 1968 Night of the Living Dead remained almost exactly the same in popular culture understanding until 2002, when 28 Days Later came out. And that really introduced, even though technically, and purists will argue this, that it's not a zombie movie, right? Because they're still alive. But the experience of watching it is a lot like watching a zombie movie, and it really is. It sort of plays in those same, that same space of this infection that's causing people to be violently insane and to want to attack each other and spread it. And what it did was it introduced running zombies, this running menace. So no longer are they lurching around, walking down the street. They're actively running after you, trying to catch you. And so it was a whole new experience.
They run in Return of the Living Dead.
Yeah, they sort of, I mean, they're not sprinters. They sort of speed up a little bit. But I know that people make that argument for sure. I mean, people argue that they run in Walking Dead too, in the TV show.
Well, they're known as walkers.
I know, but when they get close to prey, they kind of speed up. Okay. I mean, if you look at Return of the Living Dead, the zombies are not running up and down the street, right? They're sort of lurching around, and when they see some prey, they speed up and they kind of try to grab them. But no, I hear what you're saying. What I would say is that even if it was the intention to show zombies as running zombies in Return of the Living Dead, it didn't register in popular culture. It didn't catch on, right? I mean, there are zombie movies after it. They were all slow. People weren't blown away in that movie by the fact that they were running, meaning that it sort of didn't register. That wasn't something that really resonated or registered. So 2002 was when everyone freaked out, like, oh my God, they're all running around. But yeah, so I think that was a really important aspect of Return of the Living Dead, of 28 Days Later, and then in 2000, but they were still alive. Then in 2004 you have the remake of Dawn of the Dead, where they have these undead zombies that are running around like really fast. And so, that's kind of where we are in movies right now.
Well, do you see another evolution happening? Will it continue to change? Or is this the finality? Have we seen what the zombie is?
I think it'll continue to change. I mean, I think it'll get a certain baseline, but I think it'll continue to change in the way that vampires continue to change, right? When we sort of have a basic understanding of vampires, but if you look at, Twilight, vampires sparkle in the sunlight, right? So, everyone that sees that movie or reads those books, they acknowledge they're vampires. We understand them as vampires. They want to suck blood, and they live forever, and blah blah blah. They have superpowers, and they're super strong and fast. But they changed them up and made it that they sparkle in sunlight. So what I argue is that artists will constantly be, and filmmakers will constantly be pushing the envelope in different directions with zombies. They'll have some zombies that can think and fall in love, and other zombies that, can drive cars and whatever, right? Just like Return of the Living Dead did. They'll change up the model and they'll introduce new stuff. And some of that stuff will catch on, and other stuff will sort of fade away or just be used in that one little example, right? So I don't think that all vampire movies moving forward will have vampires sparkle in the sunlight. I mean, I could be wrong, but I don't think that's going to catch on.
My son has a question for you.
Oh, yeah.
What would happen if a zombie ate a vampire?
Yeah, right. I get that one a lot. It's sort of like it would turn into like a zompire or like a vambi, something like that. What?
Give me an answer, Matt. I got to tell this kid something.
I can give you an answer. Well, unfortunately, my answer is this. First of all, I'm not a big vampire guy. But because vampires are so supernatural, I would argue that vampires don't exist. So, like, the difference between vampires and zombies is that zombies are real and vampires are fake. So
is this healthy for the psychology of a child?
Yeah, I don't know about that. This is what I would say. I would say this in theory. Everything that we understand about zombies is they're essentially only interested in hunting out and seeking the living, right? So the likelihood is that they wouldn't even bite a vampire or even notice a vampire, right? Because they're not interested in the same way they don't attack each other.
Oh, I see. Well, that's a good
Yeah,
answer.
they're not interested in vampires because they have a single goal in their entire existence, which is to hunt out and seek living people.
So it's not just any animal.
Yeah, well, actually in different stories, that's represented differently, right? So if you remember in The Walking Dead, they do eat animals, right? Because they ate his horse.
That's right. And the guy's feasting on that deer.
Exactly. So, which is the hilarious thing about that is, what deer is going to stand there in the woods while a stinking, rotting corpse shuffles up to it?
No, the guy had shot it, and he was tracking the deer.
That's right.
And the zombie got to the kill.
Right. I forgot about that. But yeah, I often think about that, though, because people will ask me, like, do zombies eat animals? And, in different movies, they display it in different ways. And my general feeling is that zombies are very, sort of human-driven. But if they do eat animals, my question then would be, okay, well, look, it's thought that zombies don't use tools and they don't work together, right? It's not like you're a zombie and I'm a zombie and we run up to a house and I say you take the front door and I'll take the back door and you scare them out of the front and then I'll trip them when they come out the back and then we'll both have a meal. It's like we're walking together but we're not really working together. So to see if zombies eat animals, all you have to do is go outside by yourself with no net and no tools and no anything else, no friends to help you, and try to catch a squirrel with your bare hands, or go out to the woods and try to catch a deer with your bare hands. It's like or a bird. So zombies may, potentially they want to eat animals, but how successful are they going to be catching it?
I can see them eating the roadkill.
Yeah, well, if they eat dead things, though, that brings up a whole question: do zombies eat dead things? Because if they only are after the living, if they eat the dead, most people would say no, zombies don't eat dead things, right?
Yeah, but if they're only after the living, that almost raises moral implications.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not sure zombies have a lot of concern for like moral standards.
But do you know what I mean? It almost makes it good versus evil, and
yeah, oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think really what it is at its heart, it's like it's kind of the one thing worse than death. It's like, what could be, death is bad. What's worse than death? It's like, well, in one way, it's worse than death because death actually now is walking around trying to actively get you. It's not like death is an abstract concept that's going to show up at your door someday, in a hood and say, oh, it's time for you to come with me, buddy. No, death is physically going to show up at your door and try to eat you. Like, it's actually happening. Secondly, when you die, you can't even find peace in your own death. Because when you die, the likelihood is you're going to stand back up and try to eat your own family. So, it's sort of like there's no peace even in death. So, it's a really grim fate.
You're one of the talking heads on the show The Talking Dead.
Yep.
Which is about The Walking Dead.
Yeah, it's like a 30-minute. They actually do like a 30-minute after show right after the airing of The Walking Dead each week. On AMC, they'll do a 30-minute live after show where they have a couple guests on and you talk about the episode, and then after that, there's actually another live 30 minutes that they air online. So you do basically essentially an hour long of live talking about the Walking Dead, about that episode. So it's a lot of fun.
So tell me about The Walking Dead itself. What do you think about the series? How do you like it? Where do you see it going?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great. I mean, I've definitely talked to different people who are sort of grumble about it here or there, have things to say about they didn't like this or they didn't like that. But, for me, I just like the fact that it is a straightforward zombie show. The fact that it's on a respected network, that it's sort of staying true to the traditional zombie roots, meaning like they didn't introduce vampires and there's not, aliens flying in and ridiculous. They didn't just introduce a bunch of other ridiculous monsters, Bigfoot setting up shop somewhere. I like that they just kept it true to a zombie story. I mean, it really is a straightforward zombie story. So for me, I have no complaints. It's breaking ratings records. It continues to do that.
It's on AMC, eh?
Yeah.
Not just AMC, not AMCA. That's the Canadian network.
Well, I'm from Detroit, so I grew up saying A too.
Oh, it's just across the bridge.
Yeah, it's literally just across the bridge. I mean, we used to go to the bars in Canada when we were growing up. I mean,
right, because you can get into the Canadian bars at 18, eh?
Exactly. And so, which meant 16 with a fake ID, So,
right.
So yeah, no, we can, from my hometown, it's on Lake St. Clair, which is, essentially connected to the Detroit River. It's, you can see Canada, right across the the lake.
Matt, now, I don't know if I've asked you this, but how do you become a zombie? Not that I want to be one.
No, you don't want to be one. Prevailing theory is that, zombieism, the way I look at it, is like a bloodborne illness. So it's an infectious disease. So you become a zombie by being exposed to the sickness in the proper way. So different movies do it differently, but the general accepted way is to be bitten or to have some sort of like blood or zombie bodily fluid get into your system. Some movies, like for instance, Night of the Living Dead, they make it more of an airborne thing. So sort of like anybody, you don't need to be bitten, and anybody who dies, they kind of turn into a zombie. But it's definitely, generally accepted that it's kind of like this infectious disease.
It's an airborne thing. You don't have to be bitten.
Well, no, that's in Night of the Living Dead. But if we ask, sort of general accepted popular culture, the most common generic way to think about how to become a zombie is to get bitten. So if you get bitten, you become a zombie. So, bites are very important. In Night of the Living Dead, his original intention, George Romero's original intention, was to make it that anyone who died for any reason turns into a zombie. But the thing that he did was there was a little girl in that movie who was bitten on the arm, and she got very sick, much more sick than you would get if you just had a small, bite from a dog or something. She got very sick and died and turned into a zombie and ate her parents. So what that sort of indicated was, oh, look, if you get bitten, you turn into a zombie. Now, he didn't intend really that. He just wanted to show that the zombie bite was toxic and, it will make you die quicker. But also in Dawn of the Dead, his next zombie movie, the main two characters that die and turn into zombies both die because they're bitten. So if he really wanted to make the point that anyone who dies for any reason turns into a zombie, it would have been better if one of them fell down the stairs or something and never had been bitten, But because everyone we see turning into a zombie pretty much has been bitten, that sends that message that, if you're bitten, you turn into a zombie. So that's the prevailing belief, is that it's this bloodborne illness that if you're bitten, you turn into a zombie.
Matt, you wake up tomorrow and the streets are silent.
Yeah.
At what moment do you realize you're living in a zombie apocalypse?
Well, I tend to be a little paranoid, so the first thing I would think is it's probably a zombie apocalypse.
That's true. You're the worst guy to have asked that question, I suppose. So tell us,
exactly.
How can we make it through such an event?
Well, yeah, I mean...
Where do we need to go? What's the best place to be? Where's the best place to be? What weapons would you need? How would you survive? Could you survive?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to luck, first of all. But, like any other major large-scale disaster or public health threat, preparedness is pretty much key, right? So zombie preparedness is like any other, type of disaster preparedness, meaning that you need to worry about food, water, and shelter and the basics, right? You got to have human beings can die of dehydration in as little as 3 days. So you got to worry about clean drinking water. You got to worry about having enough food and having safe shelter and, protecting your family. I would argue that all zombie survival is local. So, for instance, I could say to you, well, the best place to be for me in a zombie outbreak is Alaska. I want to go to Alaska. Well, I live in Southern California. There's no way I'm ever getting to Alaska. It's not going to happen. So building some sort of zombie survival plan around some sort of wonderland that you think you're going to find somewhere that's a survival oasis is just totally off base. So I think that you got to, really think about surviving relatively near to where you are right now, because you're not going to be getting that much further away, in my opinion. The number one thing I would say, though, in terms of zombie survival, is there's a lot we don't know about what the coming zombie outbreaks, right? So anybody that tells you they know exactly what the zombies are going to be like when they show up, and this is exactly how to survive the zombie outbreak, anyone who tells you they're so sure about it, they're doomed to be wrong, because we don't have a zombie to dissect and say this is exactly. So if they're wrong, and the zombie outbreak happens and they're wrong and you took their advice, yeah, that guy was the jerk that was wrong, but you're the one getting eaten because you took his advice too seriously. So I would say that, you need to sort of prepare for the worst possible threat. And the one thing that we could all agree on is that for whatever zombies will be like, people make zombies, right? Without people, there can't be zombies. So the number one rule I would say is stay away from other people. Large groups of other people. Now, granted, you don't want to be just all by yourself, but do not go where you think you will find large groups of other people. So, for instance, refugee camps, government facilities, malls, large big box stores like Costco. You don't want to do whatever your zombie survival plan is. The first thing you need to ask yourself once you come up with it is, will other people want to do this same thing? And if your answer is yes, if other people will be doing the same thing that you plan to do, that means you will run into them, so do not do it.
Well, this is great advice, regardless of the scenario.
Yeah.
That would be your advice. So do not run to the local grocery store to raid it. Everyone else is doing the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing about a grocery store is really interesting is that, there won't be anything left anyway. I mean, if you look at like what happens when there's, in Florida when they anticipated a hurricane's on its way, the shelves are empty almost instantly. So grocery stores work on this management principle known as just in time, which means all goods are delivered on an as needed basis. So if I buy 1 can of tomato soup at my local grocery store, it gets scanned into the system, and then on 2 days later, the bi-weekly truck delivery shows up with a can of soup and everything else that people bought. So the grocery stores don't have large warehouses where they keep a bunch of food, right? They have it delivered on a regular basis. If those deliveries ever stop, the grocery store shelves will become empty almost instantly. So this notion that you see in movies a lot of people after the zombie apocalypse is hit and there's hardly any humans left, but they're still able to go to these different stores and, grab all this different stuff off the shelves, there would be nothing on the shelves. Absolutely nothing.
Do you think the country is safer than the city? I guess so, getting away from people.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the country is safer than the city, granted, with the caveat that you need to know how to survive in the country. So, for instance, and you need to be able to get to the country. So, I live in Los Angeles. Traffic is horrible here on a normal day, right? So in a zombie apocalypse, the notion that I'm going to be able to get in a car and drive out of the city to the country is just absurd. It's just not going to happen. There was a hurricane that was bearing down on Houston a couple years after Hurricane Katrina, and everybody in Houston was afraid that it was going to be like the next Katrina. And so everybody tried to get out of town all at once, and it created a 115-mile traffic jam that lasted for 5 days, meaning nobody on the road moved at all for 5 days, 115 miles long. And that's not just one side of the road. That's both sides of the road going the same direction. That's all the median. That's the grass on the sides of the road. Nobody moved for 5 days, 115 miles. So this notion that you're going to get in your car and drive out to the peaceful countryside is a little off base, especially for me being in LA. Secondly, just by nature, I'm not a huge – I've got some outdoor skills just from being into zombies, but I'm not a huge outdoorsman. I'm much more comfortable with urban survival. So for me and for many other people, it might not be the best idea to go out to the country because, you could starve to death in the country just as quick as you can in the city, especially if you don't know what you're doing out there.
Yeah, I would say faster.
Yeah, faster, right.
Matt, are you prepared?
I think I'm as prepared as I can be. Yeah. I'm not sure if you can ever really be prepared for sort of an unrealized threat that is so, geez, can you ever be really prepared for your dead uncle coming back to life and trying to eat you? You know what I mean? But
emotionally prepared even.
Exactly. So, but no, I'm as prepared as let's just put it this way. I've been obsessed with zombies for a long, long time, and I've been a full-time zombie expert for a little over 2 years now. So basically, all I do is spend my time thinking about zombies. So within that, with that background, I'm as prepared as you might think if someone would be.
Hey, Matt, you're an author. You've written a book, Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Zombies. Tell us a little bit about that book. We're getting short on time here, but...
Yeah, so, Everything You Ever Want to Know About Zombies is it essentially covers all the research that I've done and the kind of Zombie Research Society has done over the past 6, 7, 8 years. So it's divided up into 4 sections. The zombie basics, which we kind of talk about what is a zombie, what's not a zombie, and then zombie science and zombie survival, and then we conclude with zombie pop culture, where we talk about the movies and the video games and all that kind of fun stuff. And
you've written a kid's book. I'm just looking at it right now. That's not your mommy anymore.
Exactly. It's designed to teach kids
how to kill their mom,
how to recognize the zombie outbreak. Yeah, it's essentially a cautionary tale that teaches kids how to recognize a zombie outbreak, and it's kind of it's supposed to be fun and it's not too gory, and it's kind of Dr. Seuss meets Night of the Living Dead. So it's all rhyming and a very kind of simple language, and it just sort of, it kind of is what it sounds like. It's the mom gets infected and turns into a zombie and chases the kid around the house. But the fortunate thing is that the kid is the boy in the book is prepared, so he's able to grab his little survival kit and escape and live happily ever after.
Matt, could you or would you kill a member of your family, of your close family, if they were a zombie?
I mean, there's been a lot of research on who is able to kill and who they're able to kill and things like that. I mean, it's easy to say, oh yeah, I would, I'd kill anybody. I would like to say that, and I, that would kind of be my answer. But there's such compelling research out there that you never really know until it happens. So when you see in these movie scenes of people turning into zombies and then their spouses don't want to kill them and the spouses end up getting eaten by them, like, oh my gosh, my kid's a zombie and I can't bear to kill him, so I'm going to get eaten by my kid. That's actually relatively realistic. I mean, that would happen to a lot of people. And you say in terms of survival, it's like stay away from other people. And the problem is, you go to the government, refugee camp and they sit you down on a cot next to some guy who's got a long sleeve shirt on and he looks a little pale. And you say, hey, how you doing, buddy? And he's like, oh, I'm fine. But, little do you know, he's already bitten on the arm and he's covering it up with his shirt. And then you all go to sleep and he turns into a zombie in the middle of the night and eats you. And you see that in the movies all the time, but I think actually that's pretty realistic. I mean, I think there would be a lot of people infected that are trying to hide it. And you essentially don't want to be around other people for that reason and many others. Your family, are they okay with you? They think that you're a little odd? Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, I think they've thought I was a little odd for a long time. So this is, it's not like I was totally normal my whole life and then all of a sudden I turned weird because of zombies. So, my wife, she puts up with that. But one thing she does say is that she is kind of happy about the preparedness side of it. Because again, it's all real world preparedness. So we do stock, canned food and water and first aid supplies and things like that. So, you may think there's never going to be a zombie outbreak ever, right? But any expert will tell you there's going to be a giant earthquake in Los Angeles. I mean, we're overdue for one. So, they tell us that every year. Oh, any time now there could be a big giant earthquake and it's going to be really bad. And, it may happen tomorrow. It may not happen for 100 years. But the thing is, that never inspired me to get an earthquake preparedness kit. But I do have a zombie preparedness kit, and it works great for earthquakes. So, what a great way to get kids involved. Into the whole disaster preparedness thing. Absolutely. And, that's one of the ways that I think that that some of the board members really like this stuff. Like some of the I'll give you a perfect example. We've got a board member who is a professor of international politics at Tufts University here in the States. And so, he's into different government relations stuff and all that stuff. And he has said that he wanted to figure out a way to get younger students, college students, university students, interested in the issues of international politics, even if they weren't going to be majors, even if that wasn't going to end up being their goal in life to be some sort of scholar on international politics. He's like, some of these issues are pretty interesting and it would be cool to get them engaged in it. So he actually wrote a book that got published through Princeton University Press called Theories of International Politics and Zombies. And it's all about how different governments would deal with a zombie outbreak. Like, how would a communist government deal with it? And how does, a democratic government, how would they deal with it? And so it's kind of a fun way to introduce these topics that can sometimes be a little dry and maybe a little too, over the head of some kids. But you put it around zombies and you're still talking about those serious academic subjects and taking a serious academic look at what would happen, but rather than using some sort of flu pandemic or war, you're using zombies as the example. Well, I'm really looking forward to reading your book. You've so graciously sent me a copy of everything you've ever wanted to know about zombies, and That's Not Your Mommy Anymore. Yeah, absolutely. And what's your website again, Matt? Website is www.zombieresearchsociety.com. Right on, man. Hey, I really appreciate you being on the show today. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I'm always like talking about zombies.